Is 2023 going to be the year of co-promotion? So we just had this big event a couple weeks ago, Bellator versus RIZIN on New Year's Eve. The RIZIN card, total success. It was amazing, couldn't have gone better. The Bellator versus RIZIN portion of the card, on it, like, promotion officials will tell you it was a big success. I think it could have gone much, much better. I don't know if this was the best case scenario for RIZIN at all. Something that people keep saying is that the UFC really thought that they're the number one promotion and they wouldn't be too scared to co-promote with the Bellators and the PFLs, one championships of the world. And I just don't see that. If you really think that you're the number one organization in the world, why do you have to prove it? I honestly don't see what the UFC has to gain from co-promotion. If they were to co-promote with Bellator, they're risking something like an 0-5 loss to Bellator. And then how does that benefit them? So I honestly don't think that co-promoting with other promotions is in their best interest. It seems like kind of a lose-lose situation for the UFC. I don't think that there's much of an audience that watches other promotions but doesn't watch UFC fights. Like, how many people out there watch Bellator or PFL that don't also watch the UFC? Not many, not enough to make the UFC want to make that co-promotion happen. So, Bellator and RIZIN fought each other. Bellator wins 5-0, beats all of the RIZIN fighters. Now, there's a couple fights in there that were really close. I thought that Kim Soo-chul won his fight against Juan Archuleta, but whatever. That's more of an issue I have with RIZIN's judging criteria and judges. But overall, RIZIN kind of bit the dust on this. And I think that the big problem with this Bellator RIZIN show was the broadcast times and the broadcast platforms. They made it so freaking hard for anyone outside of Japan to watch this show. And they'll come at you saying like, well, those are the challenges of co-promotion. And I would say, like, if you can't co-promote in a time that makes sense for everyone's target audience, then I don't know if you even should co-promote. It's one thing if it was like 7 a.m. in the US and then prime time in Japan, but it was like 1 a.m. in the US and it was hard to figure out. Even like the week of the fight, there was so much confusion over like, how do I just simply watch these fights live? And it was like, if you live in this country, then you can watch it on YouTube. But if you watch it here, then you have to pay for this, and then you'll have to switch over. It was so complicated. It probably kept even more people away just because they were like so fed up with trying to figure out, how do I watch these shows? So I think that was a big problem. And it sounds like, Nobuyuki Sakakibara and Scott Coker, it sounds like they are working about maybe co-promoting again, except in Hawaii, which I think is a step in the right direction. Like that's like right in between your target audience's broadcast time. So we'll see what they can concoct with there. But personally, I don't even think that, like, if you're a promotion that is claiming that you have the best fighters in the world, that you're number one, I don't feel like you should be going up against other promotions with the same claim. I feel like that's too risky. You're going to come out with something like all 5 of your fighters are losing to your other promotion, and then it's like, okay, well, this was okay for one night, but where did that really get us in the long run? Except, the one exception I will make to where co-promoting between top promotions could work, and I have a theory about this. Is RIZIN and Bellator planning to merge their promotions? And these co-promoted shows that they're doing are sort of just like test runs to see, can we work together? Is there some good long-term collaboration? Because that's what I'm always wondering. I'm like, where is this going, guys? Is this, we're just going to keep doing co-promoted shows once a year? I wonder if Bellator and RIZIN are not going to merge their promotions maybe in 2024 and try to make a huge run at the UFC. It's possible, especially with those rumors floating around that Bellator is for sale, or at least that their company is waiting on the table to see if someone will offer them a lot of money. That's something worth watching. I wonder, I have that theory. But personally, I think that co-promotion works best between two sort of rival or similar promotions in the same region. So you got two promotions in East Asia. You got Black Combat and Deep. They're having a co-promoted show here on February 4th. That's a perfect example of good co-promotion. Whatever they decide to do, they can air it to their audience. There's probably people that watch Deep that don't watch Black Combat and vice versa. So there's an audience for both of them to gain. It's a great combination. Also, you have promotions like EFC and NIZA over in Central Asia. And they're not the only examples of Central Asian promotions that are starting to co-promote. You know, NIZA with EFC or EFC with WEF, things like that. So I think that co-promotion will work really well between these because they get to maintain everything that people love about them, and they do actually have an audience to gain. Promotions that are too small, it doesn't really make sense for them to co-promote with another promotion because they're just not well known enough, and it's like, why are we doing this? Maybe there's a reason for it. So that's what I hope to see going forward, is more co-promoted shows between two similarly sized regional promotions. But as for me, I'm not interested in seeing the UFC or anyone else try to co-promote with anyone else. And honestly, and I mean this as respectfully as I can, I just think that like some of Bellator's champions, they haven't built up the audience that if they were to come over to the UFC and fight, that those would be big. I'm not convinced that those would be big fights. I'm sorry. Like, I haven't seen anything to convince me that they would be huge. You look at, the numbers of their champions on Instagram, how many followers they have. They're not up there with like the top of UFCs. And I'm not saying that to like insult Bellator or their fighters, but if some of these fighters were in the UFC, maybe they would be bigger stars. In fact, I'm sure they would. And I'm sure that like there's probably a couple Bellator champions that could beat UFC champions. I'm not disputing that at all. But in terms of like, is this a fight that's going to sell? I'm not totally sure that it would sell gangbuster numbers. I'm just not yet. There'll probably be someone that comes along for Bellator or PFL that just like, blows the roof off the building. I don't know. If you have any thoughts about co-promotion and how you think it could work best, or even if you thought the Bellator versus RIZIN show was a success, great. Maybe it was. Maybe there's metrics, things that I'm not aware of. But personally, I think it could have gone better, and we'll see what co-promotion has in store for us in 2023.